Hello and welcome to our webcast for April 28th, 2017. My name is Christian Debré and this is Amy Asbrook, the director of Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet.
Hello.
Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet is a non-religious organization by and for people with disabilities and our allies. Our goal is to inform, unify, and give voice to the disability rights opposition to assisted suicide, euthanasia, and other ending of life practices that discriminates against people with disabilities. Today's topics, we have two. Follow-up on UN recommendation on assisted suicide and euthanasia. What was left out? It's the following of the
From last week.
from last week, yeah. And fact, safeguard fail, reporting requirement, and enforcement of safeguard. To talk about it, this is Amy Asbrook.
Okay, thanks. The first item is the follow-up on the UN recommendations for assisted suicide and euthanasia and what was left out. Last week, we reported on the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities expressed concern over Canada's assisted suicide euthanasia program and made recommendations for coming into compliance with Article 10 of the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, CRPD, which deals with right to life. We noted that the inclusion of these recommendations amounts to a victory for people with disabilities. However, several proposals suggested by disability rights activists were not included in the UN committee's report that could have provided stronger protections for people with disabilities. And these include that Canada should limit the expansion of medical aid in dying in order to protect people with psychosocial disabilities, children with disabilities, and people with dementia from being specifically targeted for assisted suicide and euthanasia. So this was a suggestion by the disability rights activists who submitted their shadow report.
Yes, and we have to remember the history of the world. Even before the Second World War, the government of Germany at this time was a normal government between coma, okay? And what they had targeted first, it was disabled people and people with some trouble with their mind.
Yeah,
okay?
mental illness.
Mental illness. And they killed many thousands of those people.
Right, and they perfected their methods of mass murder on those populations, as well as did a lot of experiments.
That was the first mass murder, and the next step was absolutely awful. Everybody knows it.
Right.
What I tell about it is that when you take a step in the wrong direction, the next step is even awful than the first one.
Right.
And there is, in theory, no stop about it.
Right.
You always want to do another step to another step. The only way to stop those kind of things is not to do the first step. Don't open the box.
Right, and so the disability rights activists suggested that that medical aid in dying be restricted to these, to not include these particular groups, but that was not agreed upon. And also consistent with concluding observations by the United Nations Human Rights Committee with respect to assuring protections for the right to life of vulnerable persons under the system in the Netherlands, Canada should require prior review of each request by an independent authority in order to guarantee that this decision was not the subject of undue influence or misapprehension. So basically, the United Nations said to the Netherlands, you should have a review process before anybody is euthanized, that your law doesn't provide enough protections and you should have a independent review before anybody's euthanized.
And we know what was happened after. It
Right.
doesn't implement that,
Right.
and the number of people killed without any reason or reasonable reason is expanding every year.
Right. And in the Netherlands, the basically the disability rights activists were suggesting that same policy should be applied in Canada, and that was not something that the UN committee recommended. So that was another protection that wasn't included in the report. The government of Canada is currently studying the idea of expanding euthanasia and assisted suicide to children under 18 years old, people with mental illness, and via advanced directive for people with dementia. The decision of the UN to not put a check on these practices is therefore very disappointing.
Yes, but we have to remember that in the whole case, it is a great victory, because the most important thing was suggested by UN.
Right.
But it left two things that we think should have been included. And not recommending by UN doesn't mean that this is bad or it doesn't want to do that. There is other reason possible to not include it. Okay?
Right.
So till those law was just removed, there is not other solution that to fighting against.
Right. Okay, it's also interesting that the United Nations Committee did not see fit to suggest that each assisted dying request be subject to prior review, as it did in its recommendations to the Netherlands. Though the Netherlands didn't change its law to comply with the UN's suggestion, the official statement in support of prior review carried moral, if not legal, weight.
Yes, there is not only moral thing, which could be used by anybody, but there is legal thing too.
Right. It creates a sort of a legal precedent that anybody who brings a case can rely on, saying, you know, the UN suggested this is an important thing to do, so that creates a sort of legal precedent.
Yeah.
Okay. Our second topic is frequently asked questions. Safeguards fail. Reporting requirements for doctors to report assisted suicides that they perform, and enforcement of safeguards. Most laws require doctors to report assisted suicides or euthanasia, but don't have any way to verify that doctors file these reports, nor any penalties for not reporting.
This is true for all provinces and territory in Canada.
Right.
Including the law of Canada, and for most law in the world.
Right.
Okay?
And there's lots of evidence that doctors, in fact, don't report all the euthanasias that they perform. Doctors don't report euthanasias for many reasons. If they didn't follow the correct procedure,
oh yeah, I'm guilty here. Do something about it.
Right. They're not going to raise their hands and say, whoops, I didn't follow the right procedure. They're just not going to report it, or they're just going to lie about what they did.
Yeah, because the only real thing that it could happen, if it's doing it in the right minding, is you have to suspend them for a month or 3 or a year. Okay? Right. It is a suspension, but nobody wants it. For a doctor, it's kind of, they doesn't want it at all.
Right. If they don't consider what they've done to be assisted euthanasia or assisted suicide under the law, they won't report. So if they think they did, just providing palliative care, they're not going to report it as an assisted suicide. That's all.
No.
Also, if something went wrong with the process, or
Yes, I'm wrong, just do something against me.
Error.
Yeah, no, nobody do it.
Nobody.
Even you have to be a saint to not doing it.
Right, exactly. When someone other than a doctor administers the lethal dose, So in Canada, even though nurse practitioners are allowed to administer the lethal dose, in other jurisdictions, it happens sometimes that somebody who is not a doctor, who's not allowed to administer the lethal dose, and sometimes they won't report the euthanasia if that happens.
Yeah, an error could happen,
Right.
or a member of the family may be a little bit too rushy about it, or
Right.
you don't know what could happen. If you could think about it, it will happen.
Right, right. If you can think of it, it already happened. And any other reason, there's a lot of reasons that doctors don't file the report. And, again, if you can think of it, it's probably already happened. Even when there are penalties, doctors who don't report are rarely identified or punished. Because if you don't report, obviously there's no trail back to you.
Yeah, nobody will do anything about it. Nobody knows.
Right. Nobody else is going to report the doctor for not reporting.
Yeah.
Assisted suicide and euthanasia cannot be counted in the statistics if they're not reported. So it's obvious if there's no report of what happened, it's not going to end up in the statistics, and nobody's going to know how many there really are.
Yeah, and it's affecting not only the person itself, it's affecting everybody around,
Right.
because you kind of lying about the statistic.
Right, exactly. And there was some indication in Quebec that there may have been doctors who weren't reporting, but the Commission on End-of-Life Care didn't even follow up on that. It was just some clues that might be happening, but there was no follow-up on it. So
even the government say to the Commission, don't look at over there, we have something else you have to look over.
Right.
So nothing happened.
Right. Let's see. In most jurisdictions, assisted suicide are not counted as suicide, except in Oregon. And there's still a policy for preventing suicides, but when assisted suicides aren't counted as suicides, then they don't count in those statistics for suicide prevention.
Again, it's make something bad about the statistic, and it's influence to everybody else, because you could not do the right thing about the law.
Right, okay. Also, problems are rarely investigated and safeguards are not enforced. For example, government agencies often lack power, funds, or motivation to investigate problems or abuses, even when a violation is found.
Yeah.
And that was the case in Quebec.
Yeah. 262 case looked at, and they found 3 case who doesn't respect the law.
Right. They actually didn't analyze all 262 cases, but of 148 that they analyzed, they found that 3 didn't comply with the law.
Okay.
But they didn't follow up on it at all.
And the not complying about the law made something special, because the law is just a notch, an exception inside the law about homicide. And they say this homicide is a special case if you do that way. But if you are outside, you commit an homicide.
Right.
Where is the police? We have 3 cases who doesn't respect this exception.
Right. But
where is the committee to look at it?
Right. Nobody's following up on
No, nothing happens. It just fall into the cracks and
Right.
disappear.
Right. Also, agencies and professional associations who work closely with doctors may have a conflict of interest and not want to investigate.
No, doesn't exist conflict of interest.
Right. So the College of Physicians and Surgeons, obviously is not really going to want to follow up with doctors to, investigate if there's a problem.
Yeah, your job is to protecting the doctor.
Right.
And to make things looking right about the population, and something wrong happen, and you have to charge a doctor who is normally a good doctor.
Right.
It's a good guy, and you have to do something against him.
Right.
And there's something fishy
or
about
even
it.
if the doctor isn't a good doctor, it's very hard to get the College of Physicians to act against a doctor.
Yeah, he have the law, the right to practice. He's follow those courses, and You
his
succeed.
dues. That's the
Yeah.
important thing. Also, once a person is dead, it's rare that someone comes forward to say there's a problem. So if a person has been euthanized inappropriately, the family is rarely willing to come forward and say, well, this was a problem, because they're in grief, you know?
Yeah.
And they
And
don't wanna
maybe
uncover
it's
the
better
problem.
like that.
Yeah.
It's better for him. He's dead now.
Right.
That's what family do normally.
Right. They don't want to open that can of worms.
Yeah.
And finally, the standard of proof that a doctor acted properly is often very low, even below the negligence standard, which is low. So doctors aren't held to a very high standard of proof. They have to just say that they acted in good conscience.
Yeah. Even if it's not, they just have to say it.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So if you want more information about the information that we talk about here, you can go to our Facebook page at facebook.com/toujours vivant, not dead yet, all one word. Go to our website at tvndy.ca. Send us an email at info@tv-ndy.ca, or you can follow us on Twitter @TVNDY. Thanks to Christiane for helping out. And thanks to you all
Mrs.
for being
Butler.
there. And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.